Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Parent Quicksmarts. In this episode, we will be covering Grade 5, Division of Decimals. Think back to when we were in school. Division of decimals was as simple as the old decimal slide. Remember, if there's a decimal in the divisor, you just slide it to the right, and then you slide the decimal in the dividend over the same number of places, and you follow the long division rules of divide, multiply, subtract, and bring down. This got us the answer, but we didn't necessarily understand how or why it worked, and we often couldn't tell whether our solution was reasonable, only that we followed the correct steps. In 5th grade, as your children learn to divide with decimals, we want them to be able to make sense of what is happening to the values when you divide, and be able to explain why their answer is justified. In studying division of decimals in 5th grade, students should first be able to understand how the division of decimals relates to what they already know about dividing whole numbers. They will also develop strategies for dividing whole numbers in decimals, and they will need to be able to understand how to divide decimals by decimals. Your child's teacher will most likely start your child's study of dividing decimals with a challenging real-world problem, such as the one displayed below. They may first ask your child to determine a reasonable estimate for how long it would take the tortoise to go 2 miles. Estimates can vary, but what is important is that your child chooses a strategy that helps them to quickly reason through the problem and get a benchmark that can be used to compare the reasonability of their final solution with. For example, in this situation, since they are trying to figure out how many groups of 20/100ths of a mile it takes to go 2 whole miles, a child may see that 2/10ths or 20/100ths is close to about 25/100ths, relating it to money. Using their knowledge of quarters, they may see that 8 quarters is $2, so 8 groups of 25/100ths is going to be 2 wholes. They could then estimate that when they divide 2 wholes into groups of 2/10ths or 20/100ths, they're going to have about 8 groups, or it will be about 8 hours for the tortoise to travel 2 miles. When determining the actual solution, your child may choose to use a number line to explain their thinking or reason through the problem with. When we divide with decimals, the same as we do with whole numbers, we are splitting a value into equal-sized groups. Here, we are splitting 2 whole miles into equal groups of 20/100ths of a mile, or the distance the tortoise travels every hour. Our number line below is 2 whole units long to represent the 2 whole miles we want the tortoise to travel. Each of our 2 whole units on the number line has been split into 10 equal pieces, or tenths. By 5th grade, a child should understand that 20/100ths is equivalent to 2/10ths, the same way that 20 pennies would be equivalent to 2 dimes. So in this example, we are going to split our 2 wholes into groups of 2/10ths of a mile, which would be equivalent to the 20/100ths of a mile we want for each group. If we continue splitting the 2 wholes into equal groups of 2/10ths or 20/100ths of a mile, we will find that we get 10 whole groups. And if each group is representing 1 hour that the tortoise takes to travel that 2/10ths or 20/100ths of a mile, we see that it takes him 10 hours to travel the 2 whole miles. So 2 miles split equally into groups of 20/100ths of a mile will give 10 equal groups, or 10 hours. A student could also be able to relate the division of decimals to the division of whole numbers in order to solve this problem. For example, they know that 20 ones split into equal-sized groups of 2 ones would give them 10 groups of 2 ones. They can use this understanding and look at 200 ones as 20 tens, reading out to the tens place. And 20 tens split into groups of 2 tens will give them 10 groups as well, but 10 groups of 2 tens. If we relate this back to the problem, 2 wholes read out to the tenths place would be 20 tenths, and 20 tenths split into groups of 2 tenths would be 10 groups of 2 tenths. In this way, student could use their understanding of whole number division in order to divide decimal values. Let's look at another division scenario. We would again want the student to estimate a benchmark to compare the reasonableness of their final solution to. Because we are splitting 3 6/10 yards into equal groups of 3/10 of a yard for each bag, one strategy that a student could use would be their basic facts. If they realize that 36 ones divided into groups of 3 ones would give you 12 groups of 3 ones, they may see that 3 6/10 would be 36 tenths, and 36 tenths split into equal groups of 3 tenths would still give you 12 equal groups of 3 tenths. Now that we have a reasonable estimate for our solution, in order to prove our actual answer, a strategy that we could use is a model. For example, if we use this 100 grid to represent one whole, and each of its 10 equal columns are 1/10 of that whole, in order to represent the full 3 6/10 yards of fabric, we would need 3 whole grids and 6/10 or 6 columns of the 4th grid. This would represent our 3 6/10 yards of fabric that we have to make the bags. I can then shade in groups that are a size of 3/10 of a whole to determine how many groups of 3/10 or how many bags I can make out of the 3 wholes and 6/10. Once I come to the next group, I see I'm going to have to use 1/10 from my whole and 2/10 from the next whole, and then I continue along making my groups of 3/10. And I see that I get 12 equal groups of 3/10 out of 3 6/10 yards of fabric. Some questions that you can ask your child about their math and give them an opportunity to explain their thinking are: describe how you could determine a reasonable estimate for your solution. How is dividing decimals similar to dividing whole numbers? How could you use a model to explain your solution? You can practice your child's division of decimal skills in the real world as well. Have your 5th grader help you divide up an amount of money between several people, or see how much of their favorite candy they could purchase with $10. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Parent Quicksmarts. As always, the best way to help your child is to keep in constant communication with your child's teacher. Visit the websites www.thinkcentral.com and elementarymath.mysdhc.org for more help. See you next episode